one ordinary dinner, carried to the same elderly neighbor every night, led a single father to the one person he never expected to see again, the CEO, who had rejected him just 6 weeks earlier. But the real shock wasn't that she answered the door. It was the bright green word, completed, glowing on her tablet while the old woman's stove still carried a red warning tag. That night, Caleb Bennett realized someone had closed a repair order, but no one had solved the problem. One simple act of kindness, one unopened truth, and one decision that would force an entire company to face what its own numbers had been hiding. The wind coming off the Milwaukee River had sharpened the February night into something that cut through gloves and coat sleeves. Caleb Bennett held a faded blue casserole dish against his chest, while his 10-year-old daughter, Ruby, walked beside him, carrying a paper bag of warm cornbread. "Night 19, Ruby said, as they crossed the second-floor hallway of Cedar Court. Caleb glanced down at her. "You're still counting?" "Mrs. Finch is counting." Yellow light spilled from the aging fixtures overhead. Somewhere beyond the brick walls, a freight train groaned through the industrial district. The pipes inside the building answered with a hollow knock. For 19 evenings, Caleb and Ruby had carried dinner to apartment 2B. Dolores Finch always opened the door slowly, leaning on the brass-handled cane she claimed she did not need. She would complain that they brought too much food, then return the casserole dish the following afternoon, washed and dried. Tonight, no light showed beneath her door. Ruby tightened her grip on the bag. Maybe she fell asleep. Maybe. Caleb knocked 3 times. They waited. No familiar shuffle crossed the floor. No cheerful voice called for them to come in before the food got cold. Caleb knocked again, louder. A lock turned. The door opened, but the woman standing there was not Dolores. Claire Whitmore wore a charcoal wool coat over a dark business suit. Snow had melted into small beads across her shoulders. In one hand, she held a Haven Bridge tablet. Her other hand remained on the doorknob as she stared at Caleb with the same controlled expression she had worn 6 weeks earlier, when she had thanked him for his time and rejected him for the only job he had truly believed could save his family. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Claire's eyes dropped to Ruby, the paper bag, and the chipped blue dish covered in white daisies. Behind her, a maintenance technician knelt beside Dolores's gas stove. The red warning tag Caleb had watched a contractor attach nearly 3 weeks earlier still hung from the oven handle. Claire looked down at her tablet. Caleb could see the green status bar from the hallway. Completed. The date beneath it was 17 days old. Ruby leaned closer to her father. "Dad?" Caleb kept his voice even. "We brought Mrs. Finch her dinner." From the living room, Dolores called weakly, "Is that Caleb and Ruby?" Claire did not move aside. Her gaze shifted from Caleb to the condemned stove, then back to the glowing word on her screen. Something in her face changed. Not recognition this time, but the first crack of understanding. The company she ran said the problem had been solved. The old woman behind her had been unable to cook for 19 nights, and the man Claire had decided was not right for Haven Bridge had been standing on this doorstep every evening, doing what her entire system had failed to do. 6 weeks earlier, none of them had imagined they would ever stand in the same doorway. Before sunrise, Cedar Court always sounded older than it looked. Steam hissed through tired pipes hidden inside the walls. A freight train rolled across the northern tracks, its whistle echoing over warehouses dusted with snow. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor coughed before starting an aging pickup that always needed 3 attempts before the engine caught. Caleb Bennett was already awake. He moved quietly through the small apartment so he wouldn't wake Ruby before he had packed her lunch. The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people to stand side by side, but every cabinet had its place. Every mug faced the same direction. Every bill rested beneath a magnet on the refrigerator door. Before pouring oatmeal into a pot, Caleb reached up and pressed the test button on the smoke detector. The sharp beep cut through the silence. A second later, he pressed it again. Only then did he nod to himself. Ruby appeared in the hallway, rubbing one eye, her hair still tangled from sleep. "Dad," she mumbled with a sleepy smile, "it worked the first time." "I know." "So why twice?" He shrugged as if it were nothing. "Because today isn't yesterday." She accepted the answer even though it explained almost nothing. Some habits had become part of who her father was. He checked the apartment door twice before leaving. He sniffed the air whenever they walked into an unfamiliar building. If a furnace rattled or a hallway light flickered, Caleb noticed before anyone else. Ruby had stopped asking why. She simply watched. The blue casserole dish rested on the highest shelf above the stove. Its white daisy pattern faded from years of use. One handle carried a small chip that Hannah had once promised to repair, before laughing that it gave the dish character. Neither of them had the heart to replace it. Caleb looked at it for a quiet moment before turning back to the stove. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the apartment window. Inside, the coffee maker sputtered through another morning. Ruby unfolded the lunch napkin her father had packed. There was half a turkey sandwich, apple slices, and a handwritten note. "You've got your spelling quiz today. Don't rush. You've never needed luck when you're prepared. Love, Dad." She folded the note carefully and slipped it into the front pocket of her backpack instead of throwing it away. "You don't have to keep everyone," Caleb said without looking up. "I know." "But you do anyway. They make school feel shorter." He smiled, though it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. On the kitchen table sat a stack of unopened envelopes. The top one carried the apartment management logo. Caleb turned it face down before Ruby could read it. She pretended not to notice. Lately, they had both become experts at protecting the other from worries neither of them could completely hide. As Caleb rinsed his coffee mug, his phone vibrated across the counter. A notification flashed across the screen. Haven Bridge Housing is now accepting applications for Regional Resident Safety Coordinator. He stared at the message a little longer than he intended. Ruby looked up. "Good news?" Caleb drew a slow breath. "Maybe." It was the first time in months that a single word had sounded heavy enough to carry both hope and the fear of losing it. Caleb opened the job posting before leaving for another repair appointment across town. Regional Resident Safety Coordinator. The description read almost like someone had copied pages from his own work history. Building inspections, fire prevention, gas safety, resident welfare, emergency response planning, coordination with maintenance teams. He read every line twice. Ruby leaned over the table with a spoon halfway to her mouth. "That sounds like you." "I hope someone else thinks so." She smiled. "I already do." The interview process moved faster than Caleb expected. Within a week, he completed a phone screening. 3 days later, he met with a regional hiring manager who seemed impressed by how easily Caleb could explain complicated safety systems without using technical language. Then came the final interview. Haven Bridge's headquarters overlooked downtown Milwaukee through walls of polished glass. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new carpet. Employees crossed the marble floor carrying tablets instead of clipboards, moving with the quiet confidence of people who believed every problem could be measured on a screen. Caleb wore the only navy suit he owned. Ruby had ironed the shirt herself the night before. The collar wasn't perfectly straight. He left it exactly as she had pressed it. A receptionist led him into a conference room overlooking the frozen river. 2 people were already waiting. Claire Whitmore, Martin Shaw. Claire stood first. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming." Her handshake was professional, neither warm nor cold. Martin remained seated, already scrolling through a presentation on his tablet. The interview began with ordinary questions: leadership, conflict resolution, budget priorities. Then Martin projected several colorful charts onto the screen. Our new maintenance model has reduced average response times by 18%, he said proudly. 94% of resident requests are completed within 48 hours. Caleb studied the graphs without speaking. Claire noticed. Something catching your attention? He leaned forward. The numbers are good, Martin smiled. They are. But these categories are too broad. The room grew quieter. Caleb pointed toward one section of the report. Gas leaks, heating failures, smoke detectors, and broken faucets shouldn't be measured together. One delays dinner. The others can cost lives. Martin folded his arms. Our software prioritizes everything automatically. Caleb nodded politely. I'm sure it does. He reached into his briefcase and removed a yellow folder. Across the front, printed in bold black letters, were 4 simple words. Closed ticket. Open danger. Claire's eyes rested on the title. What's this? My proposal. He slid it across the table. If a contractor visits an apartment but the resident still can't safely use the equipment, the job shouldn't be marked complete. Martin answered before Claire could. That creates unnecessary delays in reporting. Caleb met his eyes. It creates honest reporting. Silence settled over the room. Claire opened the folder slowly, scanning several pages. You've put a great deal of thought into this. I've spent 15 years walking into buildings after paperwork said everything was fine. He paused. Paperwork doesn't smell gas. People do. Claire closed the folder without revealing what she thought. Outside the conference room windows, snow drifted across the river in slow, white sheets. Inside, no one spoke for several long seconds. For the first time since entering the building, Caleb wasn't sure whether telling the truth had helped him or quietly ended his chances. 2 mornings later, his phone rang while he was replacing a broken mailbox lock on the east side of the city. Mr. Bennett? A calm voice asked. Thank you for interviewing with Haven Bridge Housing. Caleb already knew. People only sounded that careful when they were about to disappoint someone. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. He closed his eyes for a moment. I understand. The decision was difficult. I'm sure it was. The call ended politely, leaving only the metallic click of his screwdriver against the mailbox. He sat in his truck for nearly a minute before starting the engine. By the time he reached Cedar Court that evening, the February sun had already disappeared behind rows of old apartment buildings. Ruby was waiting by the window with her homework spread across the kitchen table. How'd it go? She asked. Caleb forced a small smile. They picked somebody else. She looked down at her math worksheet. I'm sorry, Dad. So am I. Neither of them spoke for a while. The radiator hissed softly, filling the apartment with dry heat that never quite reached the corners of the room. Later that night, Caleb slid the rejection email into a folder instead of deleting it. He refused to let one decision convince him that 15 years of experience suddenly meant nothing. The following afternoon, someone knocked on apartment 2A. When Caleb opened the door, Mrs. Dolores Finch stood there wrapped in a heavy cardigan, one hand resting against the wall. I hate bothering people, she said with an embarrassed smile. You've never bothered me. My oven stopped working halfway through baking a casserole. She laughed at herself. I suppose that's the oven's way of telling me dinner is canceled. Caleb followed her into the apartment next door. The kitchen was spotless. A loaf of bread cooled on the counter. The uncooked casserole still sat inside the cold oven. As soon as Caleb knelt beside the stove, his expression changed. He didn't touch a single control. Instead, he leaned closer. Mrs. Finch. She looked at him. Have you noticed a strange smell today? She hesitated. I thought it was the old pipes. Caleb took another careful breath. There it was. Faint. almost impossible to notice unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. The smell of gas. His voice became calm but firm. I need you to step outside with Ruby. What is it? Please. She didn't argue. Within seconds, Caleb had opened every nearby window, shut off the gas supply behind the stove, and guided both of them into the hallway. Only after the apartment was empty did he pull out his phone. The Haven Bridge emergency maintenance line answered after 3 rings. Caleb clearly explained the leak, the location, and why the stove needed immediate attention. The representative assured him a contractor would arrive first thing the next morning. As Caleb ended the call, he looked back through the open doorway. The untouched casserole still rested inside the silent oven. For the first time since losing the Haven Bridge job, he had the unsettling feeling that the company might soon become part of his life again. Just not in the way he had hoped. The contractor arrived the next morning in a white service van with the Haven Bridge logo printed across the side. He spent less than 20 minutes inside Dolores Finch's apartment. When he came back into the hallway, he carried a small toolbox in one hand and a bright red warning tag in the other. The gas is shut off, he explained. The stove stays off until we get a replacement part. How long will that take? Dolores asked. He checked his tablet. Shouldn't be long. He offered a polite smile, hung the red tag from the oven handle, and drove away. By evening, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Dolores stood in front of the cold stove, holding a can of soup. I suppose cold cereal counts as dinner, she joked. The joke landed softly. Ruby looked at her father. Caleb already knew what she was thinking. He looked inside his own refrigerator. There wasn't much. Half a roasted chicken, some carrots, potatoes. Enough ingredients for exactly one decent meal. Ruby reached for the highest cabinet and carefully lowered the faded blue casserole dish with the chipped handle. The white daisies around its rim had faded over the years, but Caleb could still picture Hannah carrying it to the table after long winter evenings. His fingers rested on the cracked handle for a moment. We don't have to, he said quietly. Ruby looked at him. We kind of do. He smiled. Why? Because Mrs. Finch can't. Neither of them spoke again. The kitchen filled with the smell of roasted chicken, onions, and rosemary, while snow drifted outside their apartment window. Ruby mashed the potatoes. Caleb carved the chicken into careful portions. When everything was ready, Ruby picked up the blue casserole dish. We're short 1 plate, she said. Caleb shook his head. No. He divided the food evenly into 3 servings, 1 for Ruby, 1 for himself, 1 for Dolores. The portions were smaller than usual. Nobody complained. When they knocked on apartment 2B, Dolores opened the door almost immediately. You two didn't have to do this. I know, Caleb answered. Then why did you? He handed her the warm casserole. Because everyone deserves a hot dinner. Her eyes lingered on the chipped blue dish. It belonged to someone important. Caleb nodded. My wife. Dolores didn't ask another question. Instead, she accepted the meal with both hands, as though she understood she was being trusted with more than dinner. I can pay you, she offered. You don't owe us anything. I don't like taking charity. It isn't charity. What is it? Ruby answered before Caleb could. It's just dinner. For the first time all day, Dolores laughed. It was a quiet laugh, but it warmed the apartment more than the broken furnace vent ever could. Before they left, she disappeared into the hallway closet and returned, carrying a stack of worn children's books with loose bindings. I worked in a school library for 32 years, she said. If Ruby ever wants to learn how to repair old books, I'd be happy to teach her. Ruby's face brightened. I'd love that. As they walked back across the hallway, Caleb glanced through the open apartment door one last time. The red warning tag still swung gently from the oven handle. He told himself the replacement part would probably arrive tomorrow, or the day after. Neither he nor Ruby imagined they would carry that same blue casserole dish across the hallway again and again, until an ordinary act of kindness quietly became part of their lives. The replacement part never arrived the next day, or the day after that. Each afternoon, Caleb glanced toward apartment 2B before unlocking his own door, half expecting to see the red warning tag gone from Dolores's stove. It never was. On the fifth evening, Ruby carried the blue casserole dish across the hallway without being asked. "What are we making tonight?" she asked. Caleb opened the refrigerator. "Bean soup." "Again?" He smiled. "It gets better every time." "So that's your story?" "It's the only one I'm sticking with." Ruby laughed and reached for the carrots. They worked side by side in the tiny kitchen, bumping elbows every few minutes because there wasn't enough room for both of them. Outside, wet snow slid down the apartment windows while the old radiator clicked and sighed in the corner. When they knocked, Dolores opened the door wearing thick wool socks and an apologetic smile. "I called Havenbridge again this morning," she said. "They told me the part had been ordered." Caleb looked toward the kitchen. The red tag still hung from the oven handle. "They'll get here," Dolores added quickly, almost as if she were trying to reassure him instead of herself. "I hope so." She accepted the soup, then disappeared into the living room. When she returned, she carried 3 worn children's books held together with rubber bands. "I promised someone a lesson." Ruby's eyes lit up. For the next half hour, Dolores showed her how to remove damaged thread without tearing old paper. Her hands moved slowly but confidently, the same hands that had once repaired hundreds of school library books. "You don't throw away something just because it's worn," Dolores said. "You mend what can still be saved." Caleb looked up from his coffee. The words lingered longer than the lesson itself. As they walked home, Ruby held the repaired book against her coat. "Mrs. Finch fixes books the way you fix things. Not everything can be fixed." She thought about that. Maybe not. But people should at least try. The following morning, Caleb's pickup refused to start outside a customer's house. The mechanic's estimate came that afternoon. A new battery, more money than Caleb had hoped. That evening, he spread bills across the kitchen table after Ruby had gone to brush her teeth. Rent, insurance, electricity, the repair invoice. He moved numbers from one column to another until they almost worked. Almost. Ruby quietly stepped back into the room. "I can skip pizza day at school." Caleb looked up. "You were supposed to be brushing your teeth." "I heard the calculator." He folded the bills before she could read them. "You don't have to worry about grown-up things." "I already do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ruby reached into the refrigerator, lifted the blue casserole dish from the shelf, and placed it gently on the counter. "We're still taking dinner over, right?" Caleb looked at the nearly empty refrigerator, then at the apartment across the hallway. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah." "Why?" "Because if we only help people when it's easy." He paused. "Then it isn't really kindness." Ruby smiled and carried the dish toward the stove. Neither of them noticed that, at that exact moment, Havenbridge's maintenance system quietly updated Mrs. Finch's repair request. The status beside her apartment number changed from pending parts to completed. No one at Cedar Court knew it had happened. Not Dolores, not Caleb, not even the maintenance technician who had hung the red warning tag from the stove. The only place the repair truly existed was inside a database. The next afternoon, Caleb stopped by apartment 2B after finishing a small plumbing job across town. He carried a loaf of fresh bread tucked beneath one arm. Dolores answered before he could knock. "They still haven't come," she said, with an apologetic smile, as if she somehow owed him an explanation. He stepped into the kitchen. Nothing had changed. The red tag still swayed gently from the oven handle. The burners were cold. A small electric kettle sat on the counter beside a stack of canned soup. "You've been living on this?" Caleb asked. "Oh, I've had worse." She tried to laugh. "It saves on dishes." He knew she was protecting her pride. People who had spent their lives taking care of themselves rarely admitted when they needed help. Caleb knelt beside the stove anyway, checking the shut-off valve one more time. It remained exactly where he had left it. Safe, but unusable. That evening, Ruby arrived carrying her backpack and the repaired library book Dolores had shown her how to stitch back together. "It stayed together," Ruby said proudly. Dolores smiled. "So did you." They spent another half hour repairing loose bindings, while Caleb quietly reheated vegetable stew. Watching them together, he noticed something that had been missing from Ruby for months. She laughed without forcing it. After Hannah died, laughter had become something that usually arrived by accident. Here, in a small apartment with an unusable stove and shelves full of worn books, it returned almost every evening. As they prepared to leave, Dolores folded a piece of paper and handed it to Caleb. "I wrote down the maintenance request number." He slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I've called 3 times, she admitted. "Every person tells me the same thing." "What do they say?" "That the system shows everything has already been taken care of." Caleb stopped walking. "What?" She nodded. "They apologized for the inconvenience and told me the repair order was closed." He slowly pulled out his phone. "Would you mind if I called with you here?" "Of course." The customer service representative answered after several minutes. Caleb read the request number exactly as Dolores had written it. Keys clicked on the other end. Then came the answer. "Sir, according to our records, that repair was completed 17 days ago." Caleb looked across the kitchen. His eyes settled on the bright red tag hanging from the oven. He spoke carefully. "I'm standing in front of the stove right now." A pause. "Our records indicate the work has been finished." "It hasn't." Another pause. "I can only tell you what the system shows." The call ended with another promise that someone would review the case. Caleb lowered the phone without saying a word. Then he quietly opened his photo gallery. There, exactly where he remembered saving it, was the picture he had taken on the day the contractor left. The stove, the warning tag, the date. For the first time, he realized the problem wasn't simply that Havenbridge had been slow. Somewhere between a real kitchen and a digital report, the truth had disappeared. Caleb didn't sleep much that night. The photo of the red warning tag remained open on his phone long after Ruby had gone to bed. He enlarged the image until the date stamped in the corner filled the screen. Then he opened the screenshot Dolores had written down with the repair request number. The dates matched. The facts did not. The next morning, he stopped at the small diner where he usually grabbed coffee between repair jobs. The waitress, Nancy, filled his mug before he even sat down. "You look like you've been arguing with ghosts," she said. Caleb managed a tired smile. "Computers. Those can be worse." He smiled politely, but his mind never left apartment 2B. By late afternoon, he was replacing a faulty smoke detector in another Havenbridge property a few miles away. As he packed his tools, an elderly tenant sighed. "They always close the work order before anyone asks if it actually works." Caleb looked up. "What did you say?" The woman shrugged. "They fixed my hallway light twice." She pointed toward a fixture that still flickered every few seconds. "It still goes dark every night." The words settled heavily in his chest. Maybe Dolores wasn't the exception. Maybe she was the pattern. That evening, Ruby spread her homework across Dolores's dining table, while the blue casserole dish rested between bowls of vegetable stew. Dolores carefully stitched another worn children's book. "You know," she said, "Mrs. Alvarez downstairs has been waiting for someone to fix her heater." Ruby looked up. "I thought maintenance came yesterday." "They did." Dolores smiled sadly. "They looked at it. Did they fix it? No. Caleb set down his spoon. What happened after they left? They said they'd handled the request. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. After dinner, he walked Ruby downstairs to return a borrowed library book to Mrs. Alvarez. The older woman welcomed them into a chilly apartment where 2 portable space heaters hummed loudly against the walls. My furnace still doesn't work, she admitted, but they keep telling me the ticket is closed. Caleb didn't say anything. He simply noticed. The thermostat read 61 degrees. A draft slipped beneath the living room window. One heater had an extension cord running across the carpet. On the way back upstairs, he paused beside the community bulletin board. A handwritten note caught his eye. Fire door on 3rd floor doesn't latch properly. Reported twice. Someone had circled the word twice in red ink. Ruby tugged gently on his sleeve. Dad? He looked around the building differently now. Not as a tenant. Not as someone who had once interviewed for Haven Bridge. But as the safety inspector he had spent 15 years becoming. Back inside their apartment, he pulled the yellow folder from the bottom drawer of his desk. Closed ticket. Open danger. He had walked into Haven Bridge believing it was only a hiring proposal. Now it felt like something else. He opened to the first blank page. At the top, he wrote one name. Dolores Finch. Below, it came another. Mrs. Alvarez. Furnace still inoperable. Then another. 3rd floor fire door. Does not latch. Ruby watched quietly from the kitchen doorway. What are you doing? Caleb looked at the growing list. The same thing I tried to do at that interview. And if nobody listens? He closed the folder gently. Then I'll make sure I have enough proof that they can't look away. Outside, snow began falling again over Cedar Court. Inside Haven Bridge's computer system, every one of those problems already appeared solved. The yellow folder grew thicker over the next several days. Caleb never went looking for problems. He simply stopped ignoring the ones people quietly mentioned. Mrs. Alvarez invited him in after he replaced the batteries in her smoke detector. The furnace still groaned without producing enough heat to warm the apartment. They said someone came, she told him. Did they? A young man stood here for 5 minutes, and afterward she smiled without humor. They thanked me for my patience. The furnace still didn't work. On the 3rd floor, an elderly veteran named Frank pushed against the heavy fire door with his cane. The latch bounced back open. I've reported this twice, Frank said. If there's ever a fire, this door won't slow the smoke down. Caleb tested it himself. Frank was right. 1 floor below, a mother named Elena admitted she had removed the batteries from one hallway detector because it chirped every 30 seconds for weeks. I called maintenance. What happened? They marked it fixed. She looked embarrassed. No one ever came. Caleb replaced the battery from the spare pack he kept in his truck. The beeping stopped. One by one, small conversations began connecting into something much larger. Every story sounded different. Every ending sounded exactly the same. The ticket was closed. The problem wasn't. That evening, Ruby spread several repaired library books across Dolores's dining table. Mrs. Finch smiled proudly. You've gotten faster. I had a good teacher. Dolores gently brushed a loose thread flat with her fingertip. Books aren't so different from people. Ruby tilted her head. What do you mean? If no one notices the damage early, it gets worse. Caleb looked up from the folder resting beside his coffee. The sentence landed harder than Dolores realized. Later that night, he sat alone at the kitchen table while Ruby slept. He opened the yellow folder. Dolores Finch, Mrs. Alvarez, Frank Donnelly, Elena Cruz. Beside each name he wrote the apartment number, the repair request, the actual condition, and the date he had personally confirmed it. He wasn't collecting complaints. He was documenting facts. His phone buzzed. The battery shop had left a voicemail reminding him that payment for the replacement truck battery was due in 3 days. Caleb deleted nothing. He simply set the phone aside. Money could wait until morning. People shouldn't have to. Ruby wandered into the kitchen, wrapped in her blanket. "I thought you were coming to bed." "In a minute." She looked at the growing stack of papers. "Are those all Mrs. Finch's?" "No." "That's worse." He nodded. "It is." Ruby studied the first page. Across the top, in thick black letters, were the same 4 words she had seen before. Closed ticket. Open danger. She pointed at the title. "Are you sending it to Haven Bridge?" Caleb remained quiet for several seconds. "I don't know yet." "What are you waiting for?" He closed the folder carefully. "I'm waiting until every single thing inside it is something nobody can argue with." Across town, lights still burned on the top floor of Haven Bridge's headquarters. Tomorrow morning, Claire Whitmore would present another report to the board celebrating record maintenance performance. Neither she nor anyone in that room knew that, inside a worn yellow folder sitting on a small kitchen table in Cedar Court, the numbers were beginning to tell a very different story. A week later, Ruby came home, carrying a bright blue permission slip tucked inside her backpack. "Our class has a community project," she said, dropping into the chair across from Caleb. "Ms. Park says we have to find something in our neighborhood that could be better." Caleb smiled as he unpacked groceries. "You already have ideas?" "I think so." She looked toward the apartment across the hallway. "What if I talk about things people don't see?" He paused. "What kind of things?" Ruby pulled one of the repaired library books from her backpack and placed it gently on the table. "Like how everyone thinks Mrs. Finch is fine because she smiles." She hesitated. "And how computers say things are fixed even when they aren't." Caleb rested both hands on the countertop. He admired his daughter's heart. He also knew how easily good intentions could become something much bigger. "You can do the project," he said carefully, "but only if everything you say is true." "It is." "No guessing." "I won't." "No making anyone look foolish." "I promise." The following afternoon, Ruby sat with Ms. Evelyn Park after school while the other students headed for the buses. "What are you thinking about?" her teacher asked. Ruby drew 2 columns across a sheet of poster paper. On the left, she wrote, "What the screen says." On the right, "What the neighbor lives with Ms. Park leaned closer." "Tell me about those." Ruby described Mrs. Finch's cold stove, Mrs. Alvarez's broken furnace, and the fire door that still refused to latch. She never mentioned company names. She never blamed anyone. She simply described the difference between a completed report and an unfinished problem. Ms. Park listened without interrupting. Finally, she asked one question. "How do you know these things?" "My dad checks everything before he believes it's safe." "And is he sure?" Ruby nodded. "He never guesses." That answer stayed with Ms. Park long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, Caleb stopped by Dolores' apartment carrying vegetable chili in the familiar blue casserole dish. The red warning tag still hung from the oven handle. 19 days had nearly become 3 weeks. Dolores noticed him looking. "I called again." "What did they say?" "They apologized." "And?" "They told me the repair had already been completed." She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "I suppose my stove forgot." Caleb smiled, but only with his eyes. Later that evening, he added another photograph to the yellow folder. The same stove, the same red tag, a different date. The evidence was no longer a single mistake. It was becoming a timeline. The next morning, Ms. Park uploaded Ruby's finished presentation to a citywide education forum where teachers shared outstanding community projects. She clicked Submit, believing it might inspire another classroom. She had no idea who else might see it. Several miles away, on the 32nd floor of Haven Bridge headquarters, a notification quietly appeared in the inbox of Claire Whitmore's executive assistant. The subject line read, "Student Project. When completed, doesn't mean safe." Claire Whitmore almost deleted the email without opening it. Her calendar was already overflowing. A board presentation, a financing call with investors, 3 meetings about Haven Bridge's expansion into 2 neighboring counties. A student project hardly seemed urgent. Her assistant paused at the office door. "It came through the City Education Partnership," she said. "They occasionally highlight community projects." Claire nodded absently. "Leave it." She intended to watch it later. An hour passed, then another. Just before lunch, she clicked the video while reviewing maintenance performance reports. The recording began with a classroom, construction paper, markers, children's voices. Then a familiar yellow folder appeared on a desk behind a young girl with dark hair tied into a ponytail. Claire stopped the video. She leaned closer. Across the folder, 4 bold words filled the screen. Closed ticket, open danger. She knew that title. She had seen it once before, 6 weeks earlier, in a conference room overlooking the frozen river. She restarted the video. Ruby spoke with the careful confidence of a child who had practiced every sentence. Sometimes a computer says something is finished because someone clicked a button. She pointed to the first column. What the screen says. Then she pointed to the second. What the neighbor lives with. My neighbor still can't use her stove. Another neighbor's heater still doesn't work. If people are still cold or hungry, maybe the job isn't really done. She never mentioned Haven Bridge. She never accused anyone. She simply asked a question. When do we know something is really fixed? Claire looked away from the screen and toward the maintenance report waiting beside her laptop. 94% completed within 48 hours. The same number Martin Shaw had proudly presented during Caleb Bennett's interview. She pressed the intercom. "Can Martin come up?" 5 minutes later, Martin entered, carrying his tablet. "You wanted to see me?" Claire turned the monitor toward him. "Watch this." The video ended. Martin shrugged. "It's a nice school project." Claire remained silent. "That's Caleb Bennett's proposal in the background." Martin looked again. "So, he interviewed here. I remember. He questioned our reporting." Martin smiled politely. "And we verified our process." Claire tapped the maintenance report. "This child describes exactly the concern he raised." Martin folded his arms. "With respect, Claire, children repeat what adults tell them. Are you saying she's wrong?" "I'm saying anecdotes don't outweigh data." Claire opened another window. "Pull up apartment 2B Cedar Court." Martin typed quickly. The file appeared. Resident, Dolores Finch. Gas appliance repair. Status, completed. Completion date, 17 days earlier. Claire frowned. "Has anyone confirmed the resident is using the stove again?" Martin barely glanced at the screen. The technician closed the ticket. "That's not what I asked. Our policy doesn't require resident confirmation." Claire looked back at Ruby's frozen image on the monitor, then at the word completed, glowing in green beside Dolores Finch's address. For the first time since becoming CEO, she found herself asking a question no spreadsheet had ever answered. What if the system is measuring the wrong thing? Martin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his tablet. "I'll have someone check." Claire slowly shook her head. "No." She closed the laptop. "I think I'll check myself." Martin's expression changed for the first time that afternoon. Tomorrow morning, before presenting Haven Bridge's strongest quarterly maintenance report to the board, Claire Whitmore decided she was driving to Cedar Court. She canceled her first meeting before sunrise. Her assistant looked surprised. "The board packet is ready." "It can wait an hour." Claire slipped the tablet containing the maintenance report into her briefcase, but she left the polished presentation behind. For the first time since becoming CEO, she wanted to see one of the numbers with her own eyes. Snow covered the sidewalks outside Cedar Court when her car pulled into the parking lot. The buildings looked older than she remembered from the acquisition files. Brick walls carried decades of Midwest winters. Rust stained the metal railings. Children's bicycles leaned against stairwells dusted with fresh snow. She climbed the stairs to apartment 2B. Before she could knock, she noticed something hanging from the oven through the kitchen window. A red tag. Her heart sank. Martin had said the repair was complete. The stove clearly disagreed. Claire knocked. Dolores Finch answered slowly, pulling a knitted sweater tighter around her shoulders. "Oh," Dolores said politely. "Can I help you?" Claire introduced herself. "I'm Claire Whitmore, from Haven Bridge." Recognition didn't appear. To Dolores, she wasn't the CEO. She was simply another visitor from the company that had promised to return weeks ago. "I'd like to check on the repair." Dolores stepped aside. "I wish someone had done that sooner." The apartment smelled faintly of tea and toasted bread. Not because dinner had been cooking, because there was nothing else she could safely prepare. Claire walked into the kitchen. The red warning tag still hung from the oven handle, exactly as it had in the photograph Ruby had shown. She touched it gently. The paper crackled between her fingers. 17 days. She opened the maintenance record on her tablet. Completed. She looked up. The stove hadn't been repaired. The replacement part hadn't been installed. Nothing in the room matched what the system claimed. A maintenance technician working nearby entered after hearing her call. He crouched beside the stove, checked the serial number, then frowned. "This order was never finished." Claire turned toward him. "Then why does my system say it was?" "I don't know." He tapped the tag. "This shouldn't even be closed." Before Claire could answer, Dolores spoke quietly from the dining table. "It isn't the stove that bothered me most." Claire looked at her. "It was thinking everyone believed I was making it up." Silence settled across the apartment. Then another sound reached them. 3 gentle knocks at the front door. Dolores smiled immediately. "That'll be Caleb." Claire turned. The door opened. Cold February air drifted inside. Caleb Bennett stood in the hallway holding the familiar blue casserole dish with white daisies around its faded rim. Ruby stood beside him carrying a paper bag filled with fresh cornbread. Neither of them had expected to find Claire Whitmore standing inside the apartment. For a long second, no one moved. Caleb's eyes shifted from Claire to the technician to the tablet still displaying the bright green word, "Completed." Then he quietly held out the casserole dish. "We brought Mrs. Finch her dinner." Claire looked from the warm meal to the untouched stove behind her. At that moment, the report she had planned to present to the board no longer felt like evidence of success. It felt like a question she could no longer avoid answering. At that moment, the report she had planned to present to the board no longer felt like evidence of success. It felt like a question she could no longer avoid answering. When Caleb quietly held out that faded blue casserole dish, it carried far more than dinner. It carried 19 nights of compassion that no spreadsheet had ever counted. And it reminded everyone in that room what real responsibility looks like. This story isn't about who had the better title. It's about how one person refused to stop doing the right thing, even after being told he wasn't good enough. In the end, Caleb's dignity spoke louder than any presentation ever could. Today, think about one problem you've assumed someone else would handle. Maybe one phone call, one visit, or one simple meal is all it takes to let someone know they haven't been forgotten. The next time life feels unfair, remember what Caleb chose to do instead of letting disappointment harden his heart. If this story touched you, comment 1 below. And tell me this. Have you ever met someone who quietly restored your faith in people without even realizing it? I'd love to read your story. Until next time, take care of yourself. because the next ordinary moment may become someone's unforgettable turning point.